Hello and welcome to episode number 2 of my PSD evaluation of teams in the 2049 offseason. At this point, we're going to look at the teams that are the middle of the pack, if you will. And I fixed the mic problems, hopefully, so that should not be bothering you anymore. But so without further ado, we're going to start where we left off with the Arizona Diamondbacks. And of course, Arizona and Cleveland tied, but since Arizona ended the season on a 13-game losing streak, I figured they would break the tie here. Because remember, at one point they were 74-75, and they finished 78 and 88. And if we look at their schedule, especially in September, a lot of close losses. So it wasn't like they were getting blown out, but still, a loss is a loss, and really kind of the worst way possible that you could imagine to end the season. And I think the biggest question is, what are they going to do with the last 2 years of John Schmidt? Because he's got 4 years of major league service time. They have him under control for 2 more years. Could be on his way to being one of the best Diamondback players ever. But with a bottom 8 budget, I don't know. Can Arizona afford to keep him? And I don't know. So they really have to surround. They really have to surround him with starting pitching help, because as you can see, that's the glaring weakness of this team. Really none of these guys looking exceptional. And so really you can't waste these last a couple of years with John Schmidt. So it's interesting to see what they will do there. So on to Cleveland, and Eric and Cleveland win the award for seemingly always having players on the trade block whenever I download a new file. Someone's always got to go, and I don't know how that works for locker room morale out there in Cleveland, but Eric always trying to move somebody. But I think what's really interesting is that Leal, Corbin, and Perez are all coming off the books, which is great, but it means 3 members of the starting lineup are going to have to be kind of retooled on the fly. There's no dominant category here, and the starting pitching really needs a boost, as I don't really count Duarte as an ace. When your ace is as a 5.31 ERA, that's really not great. So we'll see how Eric decides to move forward into contention this offseason. I mean, obviously, some good pieces coming up, but some still a ways away. And like I said, they really have to not only retool and replace these starters, but really make some serious strides in the pitching, seemingly from free agency, because not a lot of pitchers that are close to making an impact from the minor league system. And so up next we have the New York Mets. And the Mets have kind of the dishonorable distinction of having, this super weird split. One of the weirdest, horrible on the road and pretty good at home. And I couldn't really figure out why that was. Something in the way the team is constructed to really play well at home, and it just doesn't translate to the road. So something I really wanted to look at is, obviously you look at Cox and you think, wow, he is a great player, but only a 2.8 WAR season, and I was curious as to how these home run numbers dropped. So I looked at the batting splits, and really it's kind of crazy how his production kind of fluctuated month to month. You look at May and June, and he was just horrible. Really streaky hitter. He has months where he goes, hits 351, just starts smacking home runs, 327, hits 7 home runs, but then he also has months where he just kind of disappears from the lineup. So it's going to be really interesting to see how the Mets kind of maybe retool their lineup so it plays better, not only at home but on the road, and how they're able to function when Jeff Cox is off, because he definitely often is off and he can't disappear. All right, so moving on to Minnesota. Minnesota again has a really strong hitting core, a very solid group of guys that's kind of carrying the hitting core. And something that's super interesting is that, while Ned Johnson is coming off the books and his $16 million, the arbitration raises make the team salary nearly identical before the 2 trades that just went through today, which was Steve Vaughn, Manny Bishop, and Dave Reynolds out, and several young, really good hitters in. And so it makes sense from a cost perspective, but as I've said before, it's tough to pay for pitching, and with no one really coming up the pipeline, I'm really concerned on that. Ron Ball injured for another 5 months, and even he's a 31 overall. These ratings are pretty good, but again, no changeup, so he'd probably be a reliever. And with the starter ERA that's 11th in the league and no real signs of improvement. In fact, you're sending away your best starting pitcher and one of your best relievers. Don't really see how that makes sense from Minnesota's point of view, but we'll see how it works out. Up next, Toronto. So the Toronto Blue Jays, have a ton of reinforcements on the way. They've got a bunch of guys in AAA that seem to be ready to make the charge, and kind of some AAA guys that will really help with the batting stats. You look at Juan Castillo, and I think he's downgraded because of some suspect defense and some really horrible speed, but he's really got the hitting tools to make an impact on this. I mean, an on-base percentage of 296 is about as horrible as you can be. So I think that I'm really excited about Toronto because they have the ability to really make a jump just from their system alone, which is something I'm always looking for in terms of what's a cost effective, what's an easy way to make that jump. So we'll see, and maybe Toronto has the ability to make another ad as well. So another $30 million coming off the books. Okay, on to Miami, my favorite low budget team. So assuming no non-tenders in arbitration, most of this team will be back for next season. And the really tricky thing about Miami is you really have to work on the margins to be successful. And one of the guys that I really wanted to talk about is Preston Rockefeller, and probably because his name is just amazing, Preston Rockefeller. And this is a guy that, again, really has worked well on the margins. I think the extreme ground ball really helps him, and he's had some good BABIP, but I think that's just a product of the kind of pitcher he is. And you talk about you getting a 3 WAR guy for the league minimum. That's just a really good deal for your squad. And he's been able to keep the walks down even with poor control, and has really been a star. So somebody like Rockefeller, and this is these are the kinds of things that Miami's going to have to hit on repeatedly. There's a very low margin for error. I'm interested to see how Morales develops and where he starts next season, if he goes back to AAA, if maybe he breaks the big league club. Definitely something to look for as we move forward. Okay, now on to Portland. Here's where we start getting into teams that really have a chance to make some big jumps next season. So the second best minor league system in the PSD, and wow, John was flexing earlier about his potential for 380 grade arms, and I was not impressed until really I looked at Lamb, and wow, a 99 to 101 velo starter is absolutely insane. And you look at his numbers, up until AAA, and he was honestly super young to be in AAA at 21 years old. But you look at those numbers from high A, AA ball. I mean, he was just eviscerating the competition. So it's and he's a 7th round pick, so you have to look at the scouting, and you're just incredible. He used to be a 2020 guy, and he's really risen the ranks to become the best prospect in the entire league. And so I think Portland, once they get just a little bit more development, all their starters and all their top prospects are kind of coming together at the same time to boost already really good staff. So I think Portland is going to make the jump. I could see them being a 95 win team next season if they make the necessary adjustments and if they get the necessary development from their top guys. Okay, moving on to Kansas City. So Will in Kansas City doesn't have a lot of minor league system depth, because he never drafts any players and sells all his picks for money. And Will's situation is tricky because not only does he have to replace the production of a 20-game winner and third-place Cy Young finisher in Buster Roy, he also needs to make significant strides on offense to be competitive. As you can see, this was a team that was significantly anchored by its pitching, and not only is he losing Roy, he's also losing Tony Rodriguez, barring any last-minute extension. So it's a situation where you not only have to make a big improvement on the side of your team that was, struggling a little bit, you also have to make an improvement on the side of your team that was kind of holding the fort together on the fly. So luckily, Will has all the money saved up from those draft trades, and maybe he can do some wheeling and dealing and make some moves. We will have to see. All right, down to our last two teams. Let's go ahead and look at the Texas Rangers. A really unlucky end to their season, losing their last 3 games, including a game 163 in the 9th inning by allowing 3 runs in the frame. And so, um, you know, this is something that, they make the playoffs, and this could be a whole different story. But, you know, what I see as a positive is while the starter ERA is hard to come, is hard to improve on the fly, the bullpen ERA is where I think is the most value to be had on the free agent market. So he can really, retool on the fly here. And plus, it's almost like getting a big free agent when you promote somebody like Dan Schaffer, who will almost certainly be promoted to the big league club next year. So it's like you're getting a big league hitter, and maybe you can afford then to shell out some money for some top class relievers to help kind of shore up the bullpen, and then you have a complete team that maybe can eke into the playoffs and maybe is able to hold the fort down the stretch next season. And so finally, we're going to look at Milwaukee. And when you win 91 games and miss the playoffs, you just have to shake your head and chalk it up to bad luck, or your team's poor performance against left-handed starting pitchers. I was looking for a reason why this team didn't make the playoffs, and this is really what I found, is that 31 and 42 against left-handed starting pitchers. That's really bad. And so I did a little bit more digging, and you can see that if you look at the stats versus lefties and you look at the wins above replacement, even somebody like their best player Gene McWork, who looks really, really good, really struggled against lefties this season. I mean, there was only a few people that were making really solid contributions versus lefties, and when you compare that to the team's performance against righties, I mean, it's truly night and day. And so, if you're Milwaukee, you really have to think about, okay, am I willing to just keep punting the performance against lefties? Because I think it really came down to hurt them when it came time to the playoffs. But again, if they're in the AL, they obviously make the playoffs with 91 wins. So, maybe that advice really isn't all that valuable. But that's all for this episode. Stay tuned. Next time is the kind of jumbo-sized episode, 12 playoff teams, and I'm going to change it up a little bit because obviously all those teams are good, so it'll be less about evaluating faults and more about seeing who maybe has the best chance to repeat. So hope you like that. Hope the mic problems were not as bad this time, and thank you so much for watching.